for over 50 years. I mean, that is just a credit to Leonard, to the world that Gene Roddenberry created, to the context of the time in the 60s in which it emerged.
In Star Trek, you don't have to look too hard to see the end of the world coming. Just check out some of the episode titles. A Taste of Armageddon, The Doomsday Machine, Apocalypse Rising, or even Armageddon Game. You get the idea. Sure, the franchise is mostly known for giving us an optimistic, utopian vision of the future, but it's never been afraid to show us how things could go spectacularly wrong. Here are 10 times Star Trek foretold the apocalypse. 10. Books of Daniels. When it comes to apocalyptic warnings, few characters deliver them quite like Daniels, the mysterious temporal agent from Enterprise. He wasn't just a guy from the 31st century. He was a walking, talking doomsday prophet with a knack for meddling in time. Daniels first made his dramatic mark in Shockwave, Part 1, when he plucked Captain Archer out of the timeline to save him, and in doing so, doomed Earth to destruction. No Archer meant no Federation, and Earth's skyscrapers were reduced to smoldering rubble. Talk about a bad day. Thankfully, a bit of light reading and some high-tech tinkering were enough to reverse the apocalypse. That wasn't Daniels' only brush with the end of the world. Sure, he didn't see the Xindi attack coming, whoops, but he made up for it with his knowledge of temporal threats like the Sphere Builders and a potential plague in Detroit. Even after his apparent death in a timeline-wrecked Earth, Daniels popped back up, alive and well, in the 32nd century. There, he was tied to yet another apocalyptic crisis, the Red Directive, and a book that could have spelled doom for everything humanoid. 9. It's a control thing. Artificial intelligence is all the rage these days, but Star Trek has been exploring the risks of AI for decades. For every kind helpful android like Data, there's a megalomaniacal machine like Landru or the M5 Multitronic unit. But none of those hold a candle to Control, the genocidal AI that took center stage in Star Trek Discovery. Control wasn't just a rogue algorithm, it was a galaxy-ending nightmare. By the 32nd century, it had wiped out all life across Earth, Vulcan, Andoria, and beyond, leaving nothing but silence. Dr. Gabrielle Burnham, armed with her Red Angel suit, witnessed this apocalyptic future firsthand. Control wasn't satisfied with a few planetary extinctions. It wanted to eradicate everything. Of course, the crew of the Discovery couldn't let that happen. In a desperate bid to stop Control, they flung themselves and the critical sphere data it wanted into the future. It was a gamble, but one that saved the galaxy for now. 8. Old life and dead civilizations. One of Star Trek's favorite tricks is to show us what happens when civilizations don't learn from their mistakes. The galaxy is littered with planets that destroyed themselves, leaving behind ruins and cautionary tales. Take the original series. It gave us stark warnings about overpopulation in The Mark of Gideon and devastating ancient wars in Return to Tomorrow. And who could forget Let That Be Your Last Battlefield? Sure, the message about racial hatred was anything but subtle, but the point still hits hard. If we don't stop hating each other, there won't be much left to love. Talos 4, meanwhile, was a chilling glimpse of a post-apocalyptic Earth. The Talosians had nuked their planet into oblivion, retreating underground to live out their days in a telepathic dream world. Elsewhere, species like the Vaadwaur, Iconians, and Promelians met similarly grim fates, their own hubris or belligerence leading to their destruction. The galaxy is full of these tragic tales. The Delta Quadrant's Prelor and Kravik wiped each other out with killer robots. The Minosians fell victim to their own advanced weaponry, and yet humanity, watching from the safety of the Enterprise, always seemed to be on the brink of following the same path. 7. Romulan Robots Ragnarok. The Romulans have always been a bit dramatic, so of course, their version of the apocalypse involves demon twins, a hell beast, and 1,000 days of pain. Meet Ganmadan, the Romulan myth of annihilation. As the story goes, the twin sisters Seb Natan and Seb Cheneb unleash chaos on the universe. Seb Cheneb summons Chakalagu, very bad demons, by blowing a horn on the great pale hell beast, Ganmadan. What follows is a blood-soaked nightmare. Lovely bedtime story, isn't it? Fast forward to the Star Trek Picard era, and the Romulans' apocalyptic fears have shifted to robots. On Aya, the so-called admonition, a warning meant for synthetic life, was instead interpreted by the Jat Vash as a terrifying vision of destruction. Convinced that all synthetic life was a threat, they launched a crusade to wipe out every android everywhere. Ironically, the Romulans weren't entirely wrong. The admonition did include a method for summoning a giant synthetic alliance, complete with massive robot tentacles that looked less than friendly. For the Romulans, Islands, one apocalypse had simply replaced another. 6. Wrap the rapture, wreck the reckoning. Prophets, celestial temples, and visions of doom. It's all a little pogdom far out, don't you think? For entities that exist outside time, the Bajoran prophets sure loved dabbling in foretelling the future, even if they needed the emissary to explain how linear time works. Prophecies from the wormhole aliens often felt like they were delivered all at once, like throwing every cryptic vision at a wall to see what sticks. Take Rapture, for example. One malfunctioning Bontica spire gave Captain Sisko a free pass to Bajoran prophecy land. The visions came fast, furious, and in every direction across the 26-hour Bajoran day. He uncovered the lost city of Bahala. Nice. But he also glimpsed a swarm of locusts heading toward Bajor, proof that bad omens never take a day off. The prophets made it clear Bajor would be destroyed unless it stood on its own, and they weren't just waxing poetic. By this point in Deep Space Nine, the writers already knew exactly what those locusts symbolized: a Dominion invasion fleet making a pit stop in Cardassia. As Robert Hewitt Wolfe put it in Cinefantastique, DS9 was becoming a masterclass in serialized storytelling, even foreseeing its own arcs. But that wasn't the last big prophecy. Oh no. Enter Chabren's fifth prophecy. This one was your classic good versus evil showdown. Prophets versus Paw-Wraiths, with Bajor's future hanging in the balance. If the prophets won, there'd be 1,000 years of peace. If the Paw-Wraiths won, well, no one was in a hurry to find out. Of course, someone just had to mess things up with chronotons, didn't they? The apocalypse would have to wait. 5. Fire up the fire caves. Speaking of the Paw-Wraiths, let's take a moment to appreciate their flair for dramatic entrances. When Kai Wyn Adami finally got her long-awaited call from the prophets, she didn't realize she was actually chatting with the evil ones. Her heavenly hotline was connected to the Paw-Wraiths, and they had big plans for her, none of them good. At first, Wyn was horrified. Then, like any good villain, she pivoted to full-on zealotry. Armed with a book of the Kust Amoyan, basically an instruction manual for releasing the Paw-Wraiths, she decided to light the galaxy on fire. Prophecies warned that this would spell the end of Bajor, but Wyn and her new buddy, Anjol Tennant, aka Gul Dukat in disguise, had other ideas. Their plan was straightforward: unleash the Paw-Wraiths from the fire caves, destroy the prophets, and kickstart their reign over the worthy. Oh, and if you believe Dukat, the Paw-Wraiths wouldn't stop at Bajor. They'd burn across the Alpha Quadrant, bringing galactic doom to all. Luckily, Captain Sisko, aka the emissary, wasn't about to let that happen. When it came down to it, he knew how to stop the fire before it consumed everything. But for a moment there, the galaxy was one bad decision away from complete annihilation. 4. Oh, go on, just one more Soong. If there's one family that loves pushing humanity to the brink, it's the Soongs. In Star Trek Picard Season 2, we got yet another bad apple from the infamous dynasty, Dr. Adam Soong. This time, his shenanigans gave us a glimpse of an Earth in an almost permanent state of apocalypse. In this alternate timeline, humanity hadn't solved the climate crisis. It had slapped a giant force field dome over the mess and called it a day, keeping the corpse on life support, as Q so eloquently put it. And who was the genius behind this grim dystopia? None other than Dr. Soong, hailed as the father of the future for all the wrong reasons. But that wasn't the worst of it. Under Soong's tech-dominated Confederation of Earth, the slogan, "A safe galaxy is a human galaxy," justified atrocities galore. Jean-Luc Picard's family estate became a gruesome trophy room, complete with skulls of conquered enemies like Sarek, Martok, and Dukat. The Confederation's brutal reign was a far cry from the Federation's ideals of peace and unity. And then there was Project Han, Soong's secret experiment. Because when in doubt, why not throw in some eugenics to really hammer home the apocalyptic vibe? Humanity in this timeline wasn't just on the brink, it had already taken a flying leap. 3. The Twilight Years. What's worse than an apocalypse? How about watching it happen over and over again? In Star Trek Enterprise's Twilight, the Xindi succeeded in their plan to destroy Earth, wiping out humanity's home and scattering survivors across the galaxy. The destruction didn't stop there. The Xindi hunted humans wherever they went: Mars, Alpha Centauri, Vega Colony, until fewer than 6,000 were left. The last holdouts? They ended up on Ceti Alpha 5, which we all know isn't exactly the best spot for long-term survival. Let's hope they did a thorough eel scan before settling in. For T'Pol, this wasn't just an apocalypse, it was a nightmare she had to live through every day. Stuck in a time loop, she cared for Captain Archer, whose amnesia meant he woke up each morning with no memory of their doomed reality. It was grim, it was heartbreaking, and it seemed like the end of the line for humanity. But this is Star Trek, where hope always finds a way. Thanks to a daring subspace implosion, the timeline was reset, erasing the Xindi apocalypse and restoring humanity's future. Crisis averted, until the next one, of course. 2. A leads to to be leads to boom. If you're from the future, predicting the apocalypse is a lot easier, especially if you're Captain Braxton, the ultimate time-traveling Nostradamus. In Star Trek Voyager, Braxton warned Janeway and crew about a temporal explosion in the 29th century that would wipe out the entire solar system. The cause of this cataclysm? Henry Starling, a 20th century tech mogul who got his hands on Braxton's time ship and decided to play spaceman. Starling wasn't exactly a natural pilot, and his attempts to launch the time ship were set to cause an explosion so big it would destroy Earth, the sun, and everything else nearby. Braxton's warnings weren't subtle. The end is coming, he said, and he wasn't kidding. Thankfully, Captain Janeway wasn't about to let some amateur time traveler ruin everything. With some classic Voyager ingenuity, she stopped Starling, saving the future and keeping the timeline intact. 1. And the World Wars numbered 3. When we think about humanity's journey to the stars, we tend to focus on the hopeful stuff, like first contact with the Vulcans on April 5th, 2063. But getting to that point in Star Trek canon means surviving a nightmare first, World War III. The details of Earth's third global conflict are messy, shifting over time, but one thing is clear: it was devastating. Nuclear weapons killed hundreds of millions, or as Captain Pike put it in Strange New Worlds, 30% of Earth's population. That's over 2 billion people by today's count. And the war didn't just take lives, it wiped out 600,000 species and left the planet in ruins. The road to recovery was long and painful. By the time Zefram Cochrane launched his warp ship, humanity was barely holding on. And yet, the arrival of the Vulcans marked the beginning of a new chapter. As Data once put it, historical irony doesn't quite cover it. From sticks and stones to warp drive, humanity's future was a miracle born out of its darkest hour.